you begin to notice something shift. Not in the world, in you. You stop reaching for permission. You stop waiting for approval. You stop asking the room to tell you who you are. And instead, you decide. Not loudly, not impulsively, but quietly. With clarity, with calm. You remember something powerful, that respect does not start with others. It begins with how you carry yourself when no one is watching. So you begin there. You define your own worth. Not based on applause, not based on appearance, not based on what the crowd claps for, but based on how you speak to yourself when the world goes silent. Because that's where it's built, in the conversations no one hears, in the choices no one sees. You don't need to shout your value. You need to stop asking for it. You stop performing, and you start becoming. You move through the world with calm conviction, not to impress, but to be aligned, and suddenly, everything changes. People respond differently, not because you demanded it, but because you stopped apologizing. You're no longer an option. You're a standard, not a backup, not a maybe, but a yes to yourself. And that yes costs. It costs you comfort. It costs you old habits. It costs you relationships that only knew how to love your smaller self. But that cost is sacred. Because now so you draw the line, not with anger, with grace. You no longer over-explain your kindness. You no longer soften your truth to make others feel safe. You stand. And in that standing you filter. The wrong ones fall away. The right ones rise to meet you. Not because you chased, because you became. And becoming is not about noise. It's about alignment. You stop shrinking to fit what you've outgrown. You stop editing yourself to match environments that no longer serve you. You choose discomfort over self-betrayal because you've seen what happens when you don't. You feel it in your body, in your mood, in your peace. The price of staying small is too high now. So you let go of roles, of spaces, of expectations, not to prove anything, but to finally live as someone who is no longer hiding. And that presence, it speaks. It speaks louder than your words. It enters the room before you do. It tells the truth without saying a thing. You stop chasing validation. You start walking in truth. And that truth, it anchors you. You feel it in the way you say no without guilt, in the way you rest without apology, in the way you walk away without drama, because you don't need chaos to confirm your worth. You've already confirmed it through how you live, through what you tolerate, through what you choose. You choose boundaries, you choose clarity, you choose self-respect, and you stop rehearsing those choices like a script. You just live them, consistently, quietly, unshakably, even when it's hard, especially then, because the version of you that keeps showing up now is not looking to be liked. He's looking to be whole. You no longer need to be seen to feel strong. You no longer need to be heard to feel certain, because your certainty doesn't come from their eyes. It comes from your alignment. You've walked long enough with doubt in your pocket, long enough with hesitation in your voice, and now you're done. Done negotiating with your potential, done watering yourself down for comfort, done trading presence for performance. You've seen what happens when you do. You become distant from yourself. You start asking people who don't even know you to tell you who you are. And they do. They define you, they mold you, they reduce you, but not anymore. Now, you define you, and you do it in silence. Not with slogans, not with hype, but with how you show up. You wake up and decide, this is who I am. This is what I allow. This is what I do. Not because someone asked, but because you're no longer asking. And that inner decision, it changes everything. You no longer wait for confidence. You act in a way that earns it. You no longer fear disapproval, because you've stopped betraying yourself just to be accepted. You've traded belonging in the crowd for belonging to yourself. And that kind of belonging, it can't be shaken, because it's not given, it's forged. forged through consistency, through decisions that no one claps for, through patterns that no one notices but you. You build trust with yourself by doing what you said you would even when no one's watching. Especially then. You say you're going to train. You train. You say you're going to show up. You show up. You say you're done tolerating what drains you. You cut it off. Not once, but every time it returns. That's how you build the standard. Not with force, but with follow-through, and people start to feel it. Not because you say anything, but because your energy has changed. You're not available for anything misaligned. You don't entertain disrespect. You don't argue with confusion. You don't perform for acceptance. You walk away, without anger, without drama, without apology, because your peace is no longer negotiable. You've learned, if something costs your alignment, it's too expensive. And now you move with that clarity. Not recklessly, but with clean boundaries, with soft edges and firm roots. Because strength isn't hard, it's steady. And steadiness comes from knowing you can rely on yourself. Not once, every day. In the small things, in the boring things, in the lonely things. You keep showing up. You keep doing the work. You keep choosing what's true over what's easy. And over time, that becomes who you are. Not someone who hopes for discipline. Someone who lives it. Not someone who seeks leadership. Someone who embodies it. Not someone who talks about standards. Someone who is the standard. Because becoming the standard means you no longer settle for half-truths, for half-effort, for half-alignment. You no longer tolerate behavior that used to feel normal, because normal was making you numb. Normal was costing you your edge. Normal was keeping you from becoming who you already knew you could be. And now, you're not. Afraid to be different. You're afraid to stay the same. You stop looking back. You stop asking for permission. You stop seeking direction from the lost, because you know where you're going. And that knowing is enough. You no longer chase alignment. You build it. Daily. Deliberately. Quietly. You understand now. Discipline isn't about intensity. It's about rhythm. The rhythm of showing up. When it's inconvenient. When it's boring. When no one is clapping. You don't rely on motivation. You rely on movement. The simple, grounded kind. That doesn't ask for attention. That just keeps going. You keep your word. Not to prove anything, but because it's who you are now. And who you are matters more than how you're perceived. You don't let mood decide your actions. You let commitment decide your movements. You live by design, not by default. That's what separates you now. Not your talent, not your story, your patterns. You're not perfect, but you're intentional. You're not always certain, but you're always aligned, because you've learned the cost of falling out of integrity. You feel it in your body, in your energy, in your sleep, and you're done carrying that weight. You trade the high of distraction for the peace of follow-through. You trade the comfort of delay for the confidence of consistency. You trade the need to feel good for the need to stay good, not in appearance, in alignment. And people don't always understand it, but they feel it. They feel it in your boundaries, in your posture, in your calm. Because calm doesn't come from what you control. It comes from who you've become, and you've become someone who doesn't shake when the world gets loud. You've trained in silence. You've built without the need for recognition. You've sacrificed what felt good to protect what is good. And now you walk with a kind of peace that doesn't need defense. You no longer waste energy on what pulls you away from that. You don't argue to be right. You don't engage to be liked. You don't move to be seen. You choose your battles. You choose your spaces. You choose your words because you've earned that level of control. The control that doesn't dominate others. It disciplines the self. You don't need to fix people. You don't need to change their minds. You don't need to be the loudest one in the room. You just need to hold your ground, with clarity, with steadiness, with quiet strength. That's the leadership now, not charisma, consistency, not noise, presence, not performance, embodiment, and you carry that into everything. Into how you move, into how you respond, into how you walk away when something isn't aligned. You don't wait for proof. You don't ask for signs. You trust what your body already knows. If it costs your peace, if it dilutes your energy, if it makes you question your values, it's not for you. You don't negotiate with that truth anymore. You protect it, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's lonely, even when it makes no sense to others, because you're not here to be understood. You're here to be solid, and being solid means letting go of what's hollow. Even if it once felt familiar, even if it once felt safe, even if it once felt like home, you let it go. Not with resentment, with reverence. You thank what got you here, then you outgrow it, and that outgrowing, it's not dramatic, it's subtle, it's steady, it's sacred. You stop announcing who you are becoming. You just become it, not through declarations, through demonstration. You live in such a way that people feel the shift even if you never explain it. They feel it in your quiet, in your pace, in your absence. From what used to drain you, you've stopped feeding the old version of yourself, stopped entertaining the places that kept you small, stopped returning to the rooms where you had to shrink just to stay. Now, you build rooms around your values. You build friendships around your peace. You build a life that doesn't require escape, because you're not escaping anymore. You're expanding into responsibility, into clarity, into a kind of strength that doesn't come from control, but from letting go of what no longer holds weight. You've made peace with walking alone for a while, because you've learned the walk is where the wisdom lives. You've let go of timelines, of rushing, of comparison. You're not chasing success anymore. You're living with intention, and that intention is what makes you unshakable. You no longer say yes just because you fear the discomfort of no. You say no with grace, with calm, with certainty. And that certainty is not stubbornness. It's self-respect. You don't owe explanations for your alignment. You don't seek approval for your peace, because peace is now your highest currency. You no longer trade it for temporary validation, for short-term pleasure, for external noise. You protect it like it's the core of who you are. Because it is. And in that protection, you draw new boundaries. Not as walls, as invitations. Invitations for the right people to meet you where you are, not where you used to be. You stop overextending, stop rescuing, stop trying to convince anyone of your value. You rest, you refocus, you return, not to comfort, but to clarity. And clarity tells you this: you don't need more, you need less. Less noise, less distraction, less proving. You simplify. And in that simplification, you find power. The power of rhythm, the power of boundaries, the power of stillness. You're no longer looking for inspiration, you're embodying discipline. And that discipline becomes identity. Not through rules, through repetition. You rise early, not to check a box, but to meet the day on your terms. You train your body, not to look strong. To feel grounded, you sharpen your mind, not to argue. To remain steady when others spiral, you protect your time, not to be efficient, to be present. And you speak, less often, more clearly. Because now your words are rooted. They don't waver, they don't seek attention, they carry weight. That weight doesn't come from volume, it comes from the quiet you've earned through years of showing up when no one was watching. And you'll keep showing up. Not because you need to be seen, but because it's who you are now. The standard is no longer something you chase. It's something you are. And that truth, no one can take. You stop announcing who you are becoming. You just become it. Not through declarations, through demonstration. You live in such a way that people feel the shift even if you never explain it. They feel it in your quiet, in your pace, in your absence from what used to drain you. You've stopped feeding the old version of yourself, stopped entertaining the places that kept you small, stopped returning to the rooms where you had to shrink just to stay. Now, you build rooms around your values. You build friendships around your peace. You build a life that doesn't require escape, because you're not escaping anymore. You're expanding into responsibility, into clarity, into a kind of strength that doesn't come from control, but from letting go of what no longer holds weight. You've made peace with walking alone for a while. Because you've learned, the walk is where the wisdom lives. You've let go of timelines, of rushing, of comparison. You're not chasing success anymore. You're living with intention. And that intention is what makes you unshakable. You no longer say yes just because you fear the discomfort of no. You say no with grace, with calm, with certainty. And that certainty is not stubbornness. It's self-respect. You don't owe explanations for your alignment. You don't seek approval for your peace, because peace is now your highest currency. You no longer trade it for temporary validation, for short-term pleasure, for external noise. You protect it like it's the core of who you are. Because it is. And in that protection, you draw new boundaries. Not as walls, as invitations. Invitations for the right people to meet you where you are, not where you used to be. You stop overextending. Stop rescuing. Stop trying to convince anyone of your value. You rest, you refocus, you return, not to comfort, but to clarity. And clarity tells you this: you don't need more, you need less. Less noise, less distraction, less proving. You simplify. And in that simplification, you find power. The power of rhythm, the power of boundaries, the power of stillness. You're no longer looking for inspiration, you're embodying discipline. And that discipline becomes identity. Not through rules, through repetition. You rise early, not to check a box, but to meet the day on your terms. You train your body, not to look strong, to feel grounded. You sharpen your mind, not to argue, to remain steady when others spiral. You protect your time, not to be efficient, to be present, and you speak less often, more clearly, because now your words are rooted. They don't waver, they don't seek attention, they carry weight. That weight doesn't come from volume, it comes from the quiet you've earned through years of showing up when no one was watching, and you'll keep showing up. Not because you need to be seen, but because it's who you are now. The standard is no longer something you chase, it's something you are. And that truth, no one can take. You stop asking what the world can give you. You start asking what you're here to give, not in performance, in presence, not to impress, to align. You're not chasing opportunity. You're becoming the kind of man that opportunity recognizes, the kind who doesn't beg for a seat at the table. He builds his own. And if it stays empty, he still shows up. He still prepares. He still sharpens, because he knows the weight of readiness must be carried long before the world calls your name. You stop waiting for the right time. You make time right by showing up consistently. Not perfectly, but precisely, with intention, with discipline, with the kind of clarity that doesn't vanish when things get hard. You've built that clarity, brick by brick, in early mornings, in hard decisions, in quiet sacrifices, the kind no one knows about. But you do, and that's enough. You no longer need to be understood because you've learned to understand yourself. You've sat with your thoughts. You've faced your own patterns. You've stopped blaming the world for what you're now willing to change. You no longer carry excuses. You carry responsibility. Responsibility for your time, for your habits, for the energy you bring into the room. You don't speak on everything. You don't insert yourself into noise. You observe. You discern. And when you speak, it's not to be heard. It's to be useful. You've become rare. Not because you try to be different, but because you're willing to do what most won't. To keep your word when no one's looking. To do the right thing when it's inconvenient. To stand still when your old self would have flinched, and stillness has become your power. You're no longer shaken by opinions. You're not dragged by urgency. You're not baited by provocation. You let others react. You respond. You let others chase. You build. You let others burn out. You preserve your fire. Because your fire isn't for entertainment. It's for purpose, and your purpose. It no longer needs to be loud. It just needs to be lived. Fully, quietly, unapologetically. You don't need a title to lead. You lead with your life, with your example, with your follow-through. And that leadership, it starts at home, in how you treat your body, in how you speak to your mind, in how you hold your values when no one's checking. You've stopped outsourcing authority. You've stepped into it. Not with ego, with awareness. You don't claim power. You carry it. You don't chase influence. You move in integrity. And when you live this way, you don't need much. Not because you don't desire more, but because you no longer crave what you used to. The approval, the attention, the noise. They don't feed you anymore. Because you've been fed by something deeper. The quiet confidence of keeping your word. The dignity of walking away without resentment. The stillness of knowing who you are and what you no longer accept. And from that place, you walk differently. You're not faster. You're firmer. You're not louder. You're clearer. You're not perfect. You're principled. And those principles are no longer something you recite. They are something you live. One breath, one choice, one action at a time. You stop asking what the world can give you. You start asking what you're here to give. Not in performance, in presence. Not to impress, to align. You're not chasing opportunity. You're becoming the kind of man that opportunity recognizes. The kind who doesn't beg for a seat at the table. He builds his own. And if it stays empty, he still shows up. He still prepares. He still sharpens, because he knows the weight of readiness must be carried long before the world calls your name. You stop waiting for the right time. You make time right by showing up consistently. Not perfectly, but precisely, with intention, with discipline, with the kind of clarity that doesn't vanish when things get hard. You've built that clarity, brick by brick, in early mornings, in hard decisions, in quiet sacrifices. The kind no one knows about, but you do. And that's enough. You no longer need to be understood because you've learned to understand yourself. You've sat with your thoughts. You've faced your own patterns. You've stopped blaming the world for what you're now willing to change. You no longer carry excuses. You carry responsibility. Responsibility for your time, for your habits, for the energy you bring into the room. You don't speak on everything. You don't insert yourself into noise. You observe. You discern. And when you speak, it's not to be heard. It's to be useful. You've become rare. Not because you try to be different, but because you're willing to do what most won't. To keep your word when no one's looking. To do the right thing when it's inconvenient. To stand still when your old self would have flinched, and stillness has become your power. You're no longer shaken by opinions. You're not dragged by urgency. You're not baited by provocation. You let others react. You respond. You let others chase. You build. You let others burn out. You preserve your fire. Because your fire isn't for entertainment. It's for purpose, and your purpose. It no longer needs to be loud. It just needs to be lived. Fully, quietly, unapologetically. You don't need a title to lead. You lead with your life, with your example, with your follow-through. And that leadership, it starts at home, in how you treat your body, in how you speak to your mind, in how you hold your values when no one's checking. You've stopped outsourcing authority. You've stepped into it. Not with ego, with awareness. You don't claim power. You carry it. You don't chase influence. You move in integrity. And when you live this way, you don't need much. Not because you don't desire more, but because you no longer crave what you used to. the approval, the attention, the noise. They don't feed you anymore, because you've been fed by something deeper. The quiet confidence of keeping your word, the dignity of walking away without resentment, the stillness of knowing who you are and what you no longer accept. And from that place, you walk differently. You're not faster, you're firmer. You're not louder, you're clearer. You're not perfect, you're principled. And those principles are no longer something you recite. They are something you live. One breath, one choice, one action at a time. You no longer seek strength in noise, you find it in silence. The kind of silence that doesn't hide, the kind that holds. You sit in it now, not because you're avoiding life, but because you're meeting yourself, fully, without distraction, without performance. You don't rush to fill the space. You let it breathe. You let it speak. And what it tells you is more valuable than anything you used to chase. It tells you where you've been lying to yourself, where you've been shrinking, where you've been waiting for permission you never actually needed. It tells you what's real and what's just noise. And in that clarity, you stop entertaining what used to consume you. You stop feeding what doesn't feed you back. You stop being available to anything that costs your peace without offering growth. You start closing doors, not to be harsh, to be clean. You stop explaining your boundaries, you start embodying them. And when people push, you don't fight. You hold, because you no longer need to defend what's true. You just live it. You've become more stable than you've ever been. Not because life is easier, but because you're no longer moved by everything that happens. You respond now, from presence, from principle, from a place so rooted that even chaos feels small around you, and that rootedness, and it was earned. Through years of falling off, of running from yourself, of choosing quick over true, but not anymore. Now you sit through it. You breathe through it. You hold the line. You hold when emotions rise. You hold when the old urges return. You hold when the world offers the shortcut you've already said no to. And that holding, it forges you. It separates the old self from the one you're choosing now. Not once, but every day, because this isn't a goal, it's a lifestyle. One built on the kind of discipline that doesn't need recognition. It just needs rhythm. You no longer chase the high of motivation. You've replaced it with the reliability of action. You no longer need the pressure of deadlines to stay consistent. You've created a baseline that doesn't drop just because things get quiet. You don't crash anymore. You reset. You recalibrate. You stay the course. Because this is what power looks like now. Not control over others. Control over the self. You don't need to dominate. You need to direct. With calm. With care. With unwavering focus. And your focus, it's no longer scattered. It's chosen. You give it only to what deserves it. You're not everywhere. You're here. Fully. And that presence is your leverage, because now, when you move with all of you. Not with a mind pulled in 10 directions, not with a heart diluted by distraction. With full weight. With clean energy. And that energy builds things. Things that last. Things that align. Things that matter. Because you've stopped wasting yourself on what doesn't. You no longer confuse movement with progress. You've moved enough in circles to know that pace means nothing without direction. And now, you move slow, but you move right. Every step serves something. Every choice fits the structure. Because now you're not building at random. You're building with precision. You used to act out of urgency. Now you act out of clarity. And that shift changes the quality of everything you do. You plan your day not to feel in control. You plan to stay in alignment. You write things down. You follow through. You show up. Not because it's exciting, but because it's who you are now. That's the difference. Before, your actions depended on how you felt. Now your actions confirm who you are. And that confirmation becomes your peace. You used to look outside for direction. Now you look in, not for emotion, for instruction. You wake up and you already know what to do, how to move, what to ignore, because you've trained your mind to follow order. Not chaos, not impulse, not distraction. And when you slip, because you will, you don't spiral, you return. You return to your rhythm. You return to your center. You return to the version of you that doesn't break just because it bends. That return, that's your real strength, not perfection. Recovery, not being above mistakes, but never staying in them. You recover faster now, not because life is easier, but because you've removed the weight of guilt. You've replaced judgment with reflection. You've replaced punishment with practice. And practice is where you've built your identity. You don't try to be solid. You practice being solid. You don't hope to stay clear. You practice staying clear. You don't wait to feel powerful. You practice being responsible. And responsibility is your new foundation. You own your energy. You own your reactions. You own the tone you bring to the room. You don't blame. You adjust. You don't defend. You observe. You don't collapse. You hold. And when things fall apart, you don't chase control. You return to order, your order, built from the inside, reinforced daily. It lives in your habits, in your posture. In the calm way you say no to anything that breaks your structure. Because now, structure isn't restriction, it's protection. It's what keeps you grounded when life pulls. It's what keeps you present when everything speeds up. It's what keeps you whole when the old self knocks on the door. You hear it, but you don't answer, because you've already left that house. You've already moved into a new identity, not made of noise, made of pattern, of presence, of principle. And that's how you lead now, not with force, with follow-through. You stop building for attention. You start building for longevity. You don't rush results anymore, because now you understand what grows slow grows solid. You've let go of urgency. It no longer owns you. You've replaced it with rhythm, with patience, with the quiet strength of repetition. You repeat, not because it's easy, because it's effective. You repeat the small things, the boring things, the things no one applauds, because now you've seen what they produce. Clarity, confidence, consistency. And those three, they change everything. You no longer chase motivation. You live from identity, from structure, from decisions made long before the moment arrived. You've decided who you are, and you practice it. Every day, you protect your schedule. You protect your sleep. You protect your focus, because what you protect, you strengthen. You're no longer driven by how things feel. You're driven by what's aligned. And that alignment, it cost you. It cost you comfort. It cost you convenience. It cost you all the things that once gave you escape, but never gave you progress. And now you're done escaping. You face what is. You meet it with breath. You meet it with posture. You meet it with poise. Because this is who you are now, not in moments, in your baseline. You don't collapse when pressure rises. You don't react when confusion knocks. You hold your ground, and you respond with truth. That truth is no longer external. It lives in you. It lives in how you move, in how you hold yourself, in how you say no without apology. Because you're no longer addicted to being liked. You're committed to being whole. You no longer compromise for comfort. You choose clarity even when it costs you something, and it will cost you. Old habits, old relationships, old versions of you. But what you gain is worth it. You gain trust with yourself. You gain peace that can't be bought. You gain the kind of self-respect that doesn't fade when people walk away. Because now you've become your own anchor. You've stopped drifting. You've stopped pleasing. You've stopped abandoning yourself just to stay comfortable. You wake up different, not louder, but firmer, not heavier, but clearer, not harder, but more whole. And that wholeness, it carries. It walks with you into every room, into every decision, into every quiet moment where you once used to spiral. You don't spiral now. You sit, you breathe, you listen, Then you act. From calm, from order, from principle. Because that's what Stoic strength looks like. Not aggression, alignment, not dominance, direction, not loudness, leverage. And your leverage now is your discipline, not for show, but for substance. Because you've realized the most powerful man in the room is rarely the loudest. He's the one who moves without permission and stays without apology. You no longer shrink to be understood. You rise to be real. And in that rising, some people fall away. Not because you changed, but because you finally stopped pretending. You don't chase their comfort anymore. You don't dim your discipline, so others can feel safe in their softness. You've seen what that costs. Your edge, your energy, your essence. Now you protect those things. Not with walls. With standards. Your standard is your filter. It decides what enters, what stays, what never gets through the door. And that filter has saved your peace more than once. You used to explain. Now you walk away. You used to argue. Now you observe. You used to prove. Now you live. That shift, it doesn't just change your results. It changes your nervous system, the way you carry stress, the way you process silence, the way you no longer panic when the world doesn't clap. You don't need applause. You need alignment, and now you know how to keep it. You don't say yes out of guilt. You don't say no out of fear. You say what's real, and you trust that it's enough. And if it's not enough for them, that's no longer your concern, because it's finally enough for you. You sleep better. You move better. You sit with yourself without noise in your head, because you've earned peace by refusing to abandon who you are. You're no longer tempted to regress, not because it's gone, but because you've trained for it. You've trained to stay grounded when old habits whisper. You've trained to hold posture when chaos returns. You've trained to speak truth even when silence would be easier. And that training, it wasn't glamorous. It wasn't public. It wasn't easy. But it was yours. Yours to build. Yours to break. Yours to return to, and you've returned. Not once. Every time. That's what makes you trustworthy now. Not perfection. Return. You return to breath, to discipline, to what you said you'd do when no one's looking. And that kind of man, he doesn't need to be impressive. He is powerful because he is consistent, even in failure, even in weakness, even in silence, because he doesn't build his identity on flawless execution. He builds it on recovery. You recover now. Fast. With grace. With clarity. You miss a step. You adjust. You don't spiral. You don't self-destruct. You just come back. Because you've made that your way of life. Return. Refocus. Recommit. And it's that rhythm, not intensity, that shapes your foundation. You're no longer carried by momentum. You're carried by conviction. And that conviction shows up in every choice, every tone, every time you say, "This is what I do. This is who I am." No noise, no need for confirmation. Just presence, just proof. You no longer perform discipline. You live it. Not for approval, but because it's the only way you feel right. And that rightness, it's internal. It shows up when no one's watching. It shows up when you don't feel like it. It shows up when your old self knocks and you answer with clarity, not with compromise. You don't betray your rhythm to accommodate chaos. You don't bend your routine just because the world asks you to hurry. You're done with urgency. You've chosen peace, not peace as comfort, peace as precision, peace as power. The kind of peace that comes from knowing what you'll do no matter what happens. The kind that doesn't waver when pressure rises, and pressure always rises. But now, you don't. You breathe. You hold your ground. You act with poise. Because pressure isn't your enemy, it's your training ground. It reveals what's weak, what's unpracticed, what's still reactive. And you don't run from that revelation. You study it. You learn from it. You thank it. Because every time pressure comes, you sharpen. And every time you sharpen, you trust yourself more. That trust becomes your foundation, not hype, not inspiration. Self-trust, built not in emotion, but in execution. Built every time you follow through on what you said you'd do after the feeling left. That's why your confidence is quiet now. It doesn't rise and fall. It's steady. Because it was earned in repetition, not reaction. You don't need to feel ready. You need to keep moving. You don't need to feel strong. You need to stay steady. You don't need more motivation. You need fewer distractions, fewer leaks, fewer escapes. And you've stopped escaping. You've stopped numbing. You've stopped negotiating with behaviors that soften your edge. You've started treating your attention like it's sacred, because it is. You don't give it to noise anymore. You give it to what sharpens you, to what expands you, to what anchors you. You've reclaimed your focus, not all at once, but piece by piece, scroll by scroll, choice by choice. And now, your mind feels cleaner, your day feels lighter, your goals feel clearer, not because they changed, because you stopped carrying what wasn't yours. You've stopped carrying other people's urgency, their chaos, their expectations. You move lighter now because you move aligned. And that alignment, it gives you access to something deeper. Stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing what matters, fully present, fully alive, fully here. No more divided attention, no more reactive days. You design your day now. You move through it with precision. You say no not because you're cold, but because you're clear. You say yes not because you're afraid to miss out, but because you've checked in and it matches. And that check-in, you never skip it anymore. Because skipping it cost you too much in the past. You've learned, you've adjusted. You've become the kind of man who lives by the same standard in silence and in sight. You've stopped chasing control over the world. You've started practicing control over the self. Because now you see, that's the only place power was ever meant to live. You don't waste energy trying to change people. You change how you show up. You don't demand understanding. You deliver consistency. And that consistency has become your quiet revolution. Every morning you rise not to prove, but to prepare. Not to catch up, but to set the tone. You own your start. You guard your focus. You decide who you are before the world has a chance to suggest otherwise. That's the practice now. To start from truth, not from noise. You no longer begin the day checking what others think. You begin with presence, with pattern, with clarity. Because the more you know yourself, the less you need from the outside. You don't ask the world who you are. You show the world what you've built. Quietly, through action, through energy, through unwavering principle. Your presence speaks before your mouth ever opens. And that presence, it was forged, not given, not gifted. Forged. In every moment you could have reacted, but chose patience. In every moment you could have escaped, but chose presence. In every moment you could have quit, but chose rhythm. You've chosen rhythm over results, process over pressure, order over urgency. And now your nervous system trusts you. Your body trusts you. Your inner voice, the one that used to whisper doubt, now speaks with certainty, because you've proven yourself to yourself. That's what builds real confidence. Not compliments, not crowds, consistency. You move like a man who no longer needs to be convinced. You move like a man who no longer apologizes for choosing alignment over acceptance. You don't explain your path anymore. You walk it, and as you walk it, the distractions fall away. Not because they disappeared, because they no longer tempt you. They no longer match your frequency. You've elevated, not with ego, with evolution, and that evolution required letting go of the masks, of the stories, of the identities built to survive, but not built to serve. Who you are now, you've buried that version, not with shame, with reverence, because it brought you here. But it can't take you further, so you let it go. Not dramatically, ritually, quietly, in your own time. in your own way. And now, you lead. You lead not by pushing, but by embodying. You lead not by talking, but by showing. You lead not by commanding, but by holding the standard that others feel without you saying a word. And that kind of leadership, that kind of influence, it cannot be taken. It cannot be faked. It can only be earned by the man who's willing to be solid when everyone else is shaking. You've stopped performing for a place in the world. You've started claiming it, not with noise, with steadiness. You no longer ask, do they see me? You ask, is this true to me? That one shift has freed you from 1,000 compromises. You're no longer trying to be liked. You're trying to be whole. And that wholeness, it demands a different level of honesty. You can't lie to yourself anymore. You hear it now. The subtle tension in your body when you betray your word. The quiet resistance in your breath when you delay what you know needs doing. You catch it sooner. You correct it faster. Not because you're perfect, because you're practicing presence, and presence has become your priority. You don't skip your rituals. You don't abandon your rhythm. You don't let chaos rewrite your day. Because your day is your temple now, and you treat it with respect. You've stopped multitasking your life away. You've stopped reacting to everything that pings your attention. You've stopped being available to things that do not deserve your energy. Now you focus. Deeply, deliberately. Like someone who knows that clarity is earned by what you ignore as much as what you pursue. You ignore distraction. You ignore doubt. You ignore the urge to be everything to everyone, because now you know what matters. And that knowing guides your every move. You listen more. You speak less. But when you do speak, it lands. Because it's rooted in reflection, not in reaction. You show up different now, not because you want to stand out, but because you refuse to disappear. Not in crowds, not in expectations, not in the noise of a life that no longer fits you. You've stepped into your own silence. And that silence has become strength. It holds your discipline. It carries your standards. It speaks without needing sound. You walk through the world like a man who knows who he is. Not because he's certain about everything, but because he's aligned with something deeper than emotion. He's aligned with principle, and those principles, they do not move. They hold. When things fall apart, when others fold, when everything says quit, you hold. Because your word is not negotiable anymore. Not to the world, not to your feelings, not to your past. You don't need a breakthrough. You need to keep going. You don't need permission. You need persistence. You don't need to be saved. You need to stay, and you've stayed. Through the failure, through the silence, through the seasons where no one saw you, you stayed. And now, you've become not someone new, someone true, and that truth, it speaks louder than ever, without sound, without explanation, without apology. You are no longer becoming the standard. You are the standard, and you carry it in how you live, in how you lead, in how you love, in how you breathe. This is Stoic philosophy, not as a quote, as a life. And now it's yours.